I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I can actually breathe outside. Oh boy. Just a faint hint of smoke in the air today. It's Thursday, June 8th at 8:30 a.m. and I'm out on my morning dog walk. And the air has cleared considerably compared to the last couple days, which have been quite horrible, as any of you who live in Ontario or Quebec or the northeastern US probably knows by now. Heavy forest fires in northeastern Ontario and Quebec have been creating tons of smoke and particulate matter that have been driven down over this area by a persistent low pressure center situated off the northeastern United States, northeastern Canada, driving northeasterly winds down across this area and carrying the smoke from those burning sites that I mentioned in Quebec and Ontario, just dragging the smoke over us for several days. And it's not completely done yet by any means, but we've got a little reprieve here. So it's so nice to get out and not feel the stinging and the heavy smoke in the air. Well, I sometimes wondered when we here in Canada, or Eastern Canada in particular, would start to see dramatic effects of climate change, and I guess that has been answered now. Yes, we've seen gradually increasing temperatures over the last couple decades for sure, and more extreme weather events, I believe, but this is probably the first major instance that I'm aware of that demonstrates what we could be in for with climate change. And that's a big problem because I think probably we've waited too long to react. Scientists have been warning us about this for decades now, and people in charge have chosen to really ignore the signals or make light of them like they don't really exist. And there's people still in charge that do that. Don't want to believe the scientists, just ignore it for fear of losing some money, profits. Anyhow, we're all going to pay the price eventually. So in a very real sense, we're all like passengers on the Titanic, basically, waiting to go down. There's not much we can do about it, it seems, especially if, as I've suggested, it's probably too late. Even if we were to act decisively and strongly right now, it's probably too late. That's very sad situation. So during this smoke event, I guess we've, like most people, probably just stayed indoors and kept our windows and doors shut as tightly as possible, trying to maintain some airflow within the house using our internal ventilator systems and air conditioning. But it was apparent that that wasn't going to keep all the smoke out by any means, because we're talking about very fine particulate matter. And yesterday I got outside a few times, sometimes wearing a mask, an N95 mask, because you definitely can feel the particulates getting into your lungs if you stay out for any length of time at all. So you do want to avoid that with these very fine particulate smokes. There's also gases in the atmosphere too that are not stopped even by masks. It's a treat to get out this morning and smell relatively fresh air. There's still a hint of smoke, but not too bad. From what I can see on the internet, on the smoke site, it looks like there could be times when the smoke patches come back over here again later today or tomorrow, throughout the weekend possibly, just back and forth. Usually at this time of year the winds prevail from the west to the east, which would take it out towards the Atlantic Ocean. But we're once again under the lovely Omega block, which is keeping the system stagnant right over the continent. Big high pressure in the middle of the continental US and Canada, and then the low pressure off the east coast, and they're just static. Of course, when it comes to the animals out there, they don't have any option of going indoors to get away from the smoke. They basically have to sit out there and breathe it all. And no doubt it doesn't do them any good either. And then of course you think about the sites of the fires themselves and how many animals have lost their lives in those situations. Probably thousands of breeding birds with young birds in nests or eggs, and they're all perished basically. Slow moving ground life that can't get out of the way. Trees that have been there for hundreds of years. Yes, forest fires are part of the natural world, but not to the extent that we're seeing them now across the globe. You can actually see the clouds again. For the past 2 or 3 days, it's just been a solid mass of haze and smoke. Nature does have a great ability to recover from harm, but we must be serious. We have to stop doing major activities that are negatively affecting the natural world. Overconsumption of various resources, including oil. Replacing natural habitat with extensive areas of buildings and roads. Even things like solar power and wind power are not going to do any good if we're changing the landscape to put them into effect. I think one of the best things we could do is undertake a massive tree planting program all around the world. Now obviously this would have to be done in appropriate locations. I'm not suggesting we should replace natural fields or prairies with trees, but any place where trees were once a natural occurrence and they are no longer there for whatever reason, or if we can replace abandoned industrial sites, any abandoned properties at all that can support tree growth, we need to seriously get in there and plant those areas. The old adage, out of sight, out of mind, is very applicable in this situation. Until we actually feel the strain of climate change, a lot of us will typically just ignore it or act like it doesn't exist or not worry because it exists somewhere else. So sometimes it takes a huge population of people to be impacted who were not formerly impacted by climate change to make them realize just what we're facing. So that could be a positive outcome out of this smoke event. If nothing else, it may convince people more to seriously take climate change as a major issue that we have to address and do whatever we can to address it. It's interesting how we went from a very wet spring, really, with lots of snow melt and good moisture in the soils. At least in this area, the water table came up nice and high to normal levels. I'm not sure what the situation was like where these fires are happening now, whether they also went into the spring in a very wet condition or not, but certainly here it's amazing how things have dried out over the last 3 weeks. Went from a time of having plenty of rain to having virtually no rain. And then that excessive heat, at least excessive for late May, where we were up in the 80s and whatnot for a number of days and no rain, intense sun and high UV that dries everything out on the ground layer and then makes it ready for any potential spark, I guess, to come along and set it all ablaze. But it's amazing how fast the land and woods can dry out when given the right conditions. Well, going down through our woods here, I can certainly say that the heavy smoke of the last few days hasn't had a negative impact on the mosquitoes. They seem to be as heavy as ever, maybe more heavy, but compared to climate change impacts, I can't complain about the mosquitoes at all.